Anything else? Vonnegut. Yes. Slapstick is the first American novel to employ units from the metric system throughout. Nobody noticed, so now I have to toot my own horn about it. Interviewer. Anything else? Vonnegut. Well, I just discovered a prayer for writers. I'd heard of prayers for sailors and kings and soldiers and so on, but never of a prayer for writers. Can I put that in here? Interviewer. Certainly. Vonnegut. It was written by Samuel Johnson on April 3rd, 1753, the day on which he signed a contract that required him to write the first complete dictionary of the English language. He was praying for himself. Perhaps April 3rd should be celebrated as Writers' Day. Anyway, this is the prayer. O God, who has hitherto supported me, enable me to proceed in this labor and in the whole task of my present state, that when I shall tender up at the last day an account of the talent committed to me, I may receive pardon for the sake of Jesus Christ. Amen. Interviewer. That seems to be a wish to carry his talent as far and as fast as he can. Vonnegut. Yes. He was a notorious hack. Oh, hello. I didn't see you guys come in. I was just reading a bit of Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Palm Sunday, a collection of nonfiction and interviews and such. We're joined by J.W. Weatherman. How's it going, J.W.?
Hey, how's it going to all the ladies out there? I'm sure there's like two.
We have a 95% male audience. I like to joke that we couldn't make the audience more male if we tried. But let's just get right into it today on Bitcoin Talk Show. Today is Monday, February 11th, 2019. My name is Thomas Hunt, and here's what's happening today in Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin is down 2.26% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 3,599, a high of 3,689, and a low of 3,594. That's $1 for 27,632 Satoshis. Checking out our top stories, I put out a couple of polls on Twitter lately. Thanks to everyone for voting for my polls on the @MadBitcoins Twitter account. We had 292 votes in this poll. Did you invent Bitcoin? 61% yes, 39% no. So 61% of the Mad Bitcoins audience invented Bitcoin, which is great because we've had a lot more contenders lately, with Craig Wright doubling down on his being Satoshi, whether now he's saying he was the Satoshi on the Satoshi team or the Fredo of the Satoshi team or part of the team. And there was a Bitcoin Cash developer lately who was claiming he was also Satoshi. So it's interesting to see more and more people becoming Satoshi. Which is the best Bitcoin? We just launched this poll this morning. We have 298 votes. That's an excellent result. And it turns out that Bitcoin is the best Bitcoin with 92% of the results. Bitcoin Cash, 3%. Bitcoin SV, 5%. If you can't see this and you're only listening, the Bitcoin bar is a huge, giant bar. The other ones are minuscule, which is kind of the result I expected. That's why I was so surprised to see Paul Puey's tweet from some conference where they're claiming in the background of this itty bitty little image, enhance. They claim that Bitcoin is only 44%, and they've managed to represent this in a circle graph to show Bitcoin SV as 24% and Bitcoin Cash as 32%. Whereas out here in reality, we're getting a much more 92% Bitcoin. That's 9.2 out of 10 people would say Bitcoin is the Bitcoin, not these fake contenders. JW, what do you think about these polls? First of all, did you invent Bitcoin? And secondly, which is the real Bitcoin?
I invented Bitcoin, and Satoshi's vision is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what the technology is. What really matters is what was intended by the guy that's not around anymore, and what his real motivation was. And apparently his motivation was to create a completely worthless scam called Satoshi's vision. So that's what I care about.
It doesn't seem like Satoshi knows very much about what gives Bitcoin value. A lot of people believe that having this ability to spend Bitcoin and to use it to buy anything gives it value. Whereas Craig Wright recently has been saying that he was disgusted by the Silk Road and he was upset to see people buying and selling freely without government or bank control. What do you think, JW? Is that a very Satoshi thing to say?
Yeah, I think it's such a clown fest at this point. Like the whole Bitcoin Cash thing, all the altcoins are really just kind of in their death rattles. So you can see that they're getting more and more just absurd. And I suppose that that's because they're just trying to squeeze those last few dollars out of the poor suckers that fell for the stuff, that are not willing still. You know, they're so deep into it that they're not willing to go, all right, at this point, this stuff is ridiculous. So you got to probably appeal to a smaller and smaller niche of that audience, and you got to get stupider and stupider. So I think that's what's happening. But it's nice to see that it's almost over as far as a lot of these narratives go. So yeah.
Now it's interesting to see on the price charts. Several of the altcoins are still mimicking and following Bitcoin's price. We can see Ethereum, Ripple, EOS. Tether doesn't follow it, but of course they're linked to the US dollar allegedly. We see a little bit of a different chart on Stellar and Tron. Binance Coin, a radically different chart. Everyone else still kind of just following this Bitcoin price up. Maybe this Maker, whatever that is, has a different chart. What do you think, JW? Will they keep following Bitcoin up? Because one of the problems, and we were talking about this before the show, is that yes, I managed to hold a little bit of Bitcoin. I'm hoping that it goes back up. I hope it goes to the moon. I have bills to pay, all those things. But what if I held a little bit of Ethereum? What if I held some Litecoin or one of these crazy things? Bitcoin goes up, say, 10%. The crazy altcoins go up 15%. This keeps happening enough times. I feel like an idiot over here on the sidelines. Am I just a risk-free investor? Am I in the best technology? What do you think, JW?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've been saying for a long time people should not invest in these scams. I think maybe a better approach, instead of trying to appeal to people's moral compass, is just to say, look, if you're going to invest in these scams, do it well. And that means that you need to be on the inside, because there's a lot of people that know when there's going to be a marketing blitz for a coin. There's a lot of people that know when it's going to stop. They know that they're going to do a bunch of wash trading or do any of the games that they can play to manipulate the price. And the people on the inside, they don't care, and they don't need to care what the absolute price of anything is, right? Like if the market cap of Ethereum goes up or down, it doesn't really matter, because these people are not holding large amounts of Ethereum. What they're doing is they're profiting from their inside knowledge. So if Charlie Lee, for example, knows that he's about to go on CNBC, or he's got a few different things lined up that are going to get Litecoin some attention, well, he can buy in a week or two before that stuff happens, right? And so he can buy in cheap, and then after the media blitz happens, as it's going out, he can sell, and that's money in the bank, right? That's not risk. That's not high risk. That's very low risk for him. And so if you are going to play this game, at least know the rules of the game. And basically that means that you need to get in to wherever that inner circle is, right? Like Charlie may be part of it. I'm sure there's other people that are part of it. So pay him enough money to where he'll give you a heads up before he makes a change, right? If Vitalik is going to make some announcement about, I don't know, how they're going to change the monetary policy or whatever, you just need to know that before everybody else knows it. Otherwise, you're just sheep to the slaughter.
Now, recently they said they're reopening the pump groups, and that you could join for like a 0.2 Bitcoin or a 0.5 or 1.0. Should I join those pump groups, or should I just follow this Charlie Lee on Twitter? Because he seems like a good guy. He follows me. And right here on January 28th, we could have gotten the big symbol on Litecoin right here, January 28th. We go back here, look at the old chart. Let's see. January 28th. There it is. Litecoin's still low. It goes up from there. Easy money. JW silenced and defeated. Charlie Lee's account, so powerful. Look at this. Robo Chicken. All the memes. He's got Litecoin Summit. There's a lot of these conferences lately. Does having a conference make the altcoin legitimate? I've heard of a lot of altcoin conferences. That should mean they're all real now, right?
Yeah, I think the worst thing that you could possibly do is look at anybody that tells you that just to look at the price itself, right? Like do technical analysis and just watch the momentum. That is exactly, if I'm Charlie Lee or I'm Vitalik or I'm, one of these XRP guys, that's exactly what I want you to do, because then I have that inside information longer, right? You only know that the price is going to move when it actually moves. Well, I'm already profiting from those movements, right? So that's the worst that you could possibly do. Like, you would be better off just rolling the dice and being random, because me, as part of the inside circle, if I'm Charlie Lee, I can manipulate those movements. I can do wash trading and do all kinds of other stuff to make the price move a little bit if I have the budget for it. So that is the absolute best. Like, as a scammer, I want you to only make decisions based on price history. If you move to the other extreme, that's you're me, right? You're part of the inner circle. And I don't really, as a scammer, I don't really want you to do that, because if you know what's going to happen, then that's two people that are making trades and making moves, right? You're buying low before the media blitz and then selling high with me. Well, that sucks. That's taken away some of my money. But then there's a lot of gray area in between, right? And so like these pump and dump groups, they're basically somewhere in between of just like totally public information, right? And then actually being in the inner circle. And as a scammer, my role is to make sure that you pay as much as I can possibly get you to pay for that knowledge, right? And I'm only going to give you the knowledge that will be enough to continue to keep you paying. So, I wouldn't recommend anything outside of being in part of that inner circle. If you're in the inner circle, you're guaranteed to make money. If you're outside of that, you're playing at a massive disadvantage, right? Like, I wouldn't recommend you play football, with a broken leg. And I think that would be a lot easier than not being part of the inner circle and trying to make money off of these scams.
See, now you sound like George Carlin when he said, there's owners of this country and there's a big club, and you know what? You're not in it. And I'm not, and he's not, and we're all not in the club. And you can tell, right? How can you tell, JW, that we're not in the club?
Well, because we're talking about this and we're not really happy with the status quo, right? Like, if you're getting inside information from the Federal Reserve on how interest rates are going to move next month, you're not the guy that's concerned about sound money and trying to end the Fed. So
if your cousin is the Secretary of Treasury, you might not be worried about ending the Fed.
Exactly. And if you're Charlie Lee or you're Vitalik, you're not, or you're the guys at Coinbase, right? Just looking at the Twitter page there, you can't help but see that bald head stand out. He's Brian Armstrong gets this inside information too, because he knows when he's going to list a coin and when he isn't. I mean, he's in a way the scammer of scammers, right? If you want to, think about the position that he's in. If you want to know if Bitcoin Cash is going to be listed on Coinbase, you basically have to ask him. And so he's able to buy Bitcoin Cash, and they've already gotten in trouble for this, right? Like, there's a history of this now. He can buy into Bitcoin Cash and then announce it. And then the beauty of it is he can go, oh, you know what? Actually, we thought more about it and we're not going to. He can do that with XRP. He can buy or he can short XRP if there's a way to do it, and then just make an announcement that they're not listing XRP for the next quarter. He doesn't have to do anything other than just make a statement, and that can affect the price. So if you think that you can outcompete people that can actually move the price with just a tweet, I think in a way, you deserve to lose your shirt.
If your best friend's a billionaire who runs a Bitcoin exchange but owns more Ethereum than Bitcoin, you might not be interested in sound money. See, I can make 1,000.
Exactly.
I could make 1,000 of these, but I think JW, you got in trouble with the altcoins lately. There must be one of them that you said that pissed somebody off. You said you were on the podcast, What Would Bitcoin Do? And you mentioned your new program here, 10 Hours of Bitcoin, that people can try out at 10hoursofbitcoin.com. And shortly after this, we checked out the JW Weatherman, mathbot.com Twitter account, and it tells me this account is temporarily restricted. I'm seeing this warning because there's been some unusual activity from this Twitter account. Do you still want to view it? And this is the kind of warning they put on an account that maybe has been putting out pictures of dead babies or naked women, or maybe some kind of naughty words or some kind of terrible slurs or racism. JW, what happened to you? What did you do to get this Twitter ban? What do you think you did anyway?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a guess, but this is the first time that I've ever been shut down like this. And, you know, in, I don't know, 14 months or whatever of calling out scams. So, and it just happened right after I was on the What Bitcoin Did podcast. And what I was doing on that podcast was announcing that 10hoursofbitcoin.com website. So the idea behind this website is that if you, there's no way I can bring you up to speed, or anybody can bring you up to speed on what's happening in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in an hour, right? And I don't expect you guys as normal people with normal jobs to invest 100 hours, but 10 hours is about the best that I can do for you. So I created a website, 10hoursofbitcoin.com, and it's just a series of video lectures and podcasts. You don't have to absorb everything, right? If you get the gist of it, if you put the 10 hours in, you're going to walk away with enough information to be inoculated to at least 98% of the scams that are out there. And have a pretty solid understanding of what Bitcoin is and why it's special and interesting. So that's it. I mean, that's all I did. I didn't go on a campaign against any particular altcoin. I didn't go after XRP or Litecoin or Ethereum or anything like that. All I said is, hey, this is what I'm focusing on from now on is MathBot, because that's where my passion is at. But here's a website where you can get everything that you need. And really, it has everything that I have to say, right? If I've said anything intelligent and worthwhile, it's on that website. So I don't have to keep, saying the same things over and over again. Just go there. So that's what I did. And that's why they freaked out. So it must be.
So first we have to cross out some of the obvious reasons why people get banned from Twitter. Did you tell anyone to code? I've heard of a lot of people being banned for telling journalists to learn to code, things like this. Sounds like you. Did you do anything like that?
I did, but it was like a month ago or something, or 2 weeks ago. So, it's possible. It was just a weird coincidence, but I doubt it. I really haven't been that aggressive for the last few weeks. And even then I wasn't saying it to any of the journalists that were really popular. I don't think. I was just saying it in general. Mathbot.com, learn to code is kind of my deal. So, I definitely referenced it, but, not likely given the timing, I would say.
And it's a funny thing because learn to code is a nice thing to say, and you can say it in a polite way, or you can say it like, learn to code, you're not even a person, you don't even speak this language, therefore we can never communicate. You're a sub-life form. I think that's what the journalists don't like, is this like, learn to code, journalists come. And they learn to write. They've learned a unique specialization. You can't be all down on someone's specialization just because it's different than yours. And coders get paid a lot. They don't also have to be jerks, but they have the choice, right?
The reason that the journalists are mad is because they got laid off, right? So they got laid off because the marketplace doesn't appreciate their top 10 list of ways to arouse your spouse, or whatever the nonsense is that they claim is journalism now. And they're mad because people responded and said, look, you're out of work. Why don't you learn to code? And there was some snark in it, but that's excellent advice, right? If you have a skill set that people don't appreciate enough to where you can feed your family, software development is an obvious first place to look at this point in time in history. So, I think they're mad because they think they're special flowers. And I think it was actually a great way to point out how insignificant they've become. But I wasn't a big part of that, to be honest.
Also, it can be shocking when you lose your job. People are in a bit of a transitional period. They're probably not ready for constructive advice. They're probably looking for more of a, oh, that's sad. And you have to look back and just say, what a wonderful time it was when you could get paid to write your top 5 lists. And that time might not come again. Like you're saying, you might have to reskill and go back to the well.
Yeah. But given the timing, I mean, if that had happened over the weekend, I'd be like, maybe something I said, but No, I think the timing's pretty obvious. And I think that, anytime there's a Ponzi scheme and somebody says that it's a Ponzi scheme, you're going to get flack. But if you can actually give people the foundational knowledge to be able to identify a Ponzi scheme, you're far more of a threat. So I really am, it's a bit of a guess. It's an educated guess. I'm pretty sure the issue is that their sucker acquisition cost is going to go up a couple percent because of this website.
So now it's a Monday morning. Have you gone down the traditional path? Have you requested your account back from Twitter, so on and so forth? What's happening on those fronts?
Yeah, I think it's under review or something. I had to verify my phone number, and then actually I'd have to jump on my other computer to see what the status is. But they asked me to verify a phone number. They didn't ask me to delete any tweets or anything like that. So I don't know. If it doesn't come back, it doesn't come back. It's not the end of the world. I mean, the thing that I like about the timing of this is that I feel like the altcoin stuff is mostly dead. This 10 hours of Bitcoin site in a way is my way of saying, hey, my work here is done. I'm moving on. So if I lose my Twitter account, whatever. They'd have to take down the site, right? And then I would feel pretty pissed off, but I'll find another way to get it back up if they manage to do that.
Well, yeah, I think you're going to get the Twitter account back. I'm not that worried about that, but it is worth noting, and other people have been caught up in being marked as spam. There's certain altcoins with powerful networks of so-called armies of bots and Twitter accounts and things like that. They just had a thing. I don't know if I had the tweet right here, but there was a dick measuring contest this morning. Let me see if I can pull that up. It was between Justin Sun of Tron and Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum. And Justin had this tweet where he said, Vitalik, we both have the same number of Twitter followers now, something like that. They both have 183,000 followers. And in Justin's strange mind, this made Ethereum and Tron equal as projects. And now, of course, they expect to flip in Ethereum and all of these kind of things. What do you think, JW? Does it mean anything? Obviously, Alan Silbert responded saying 30,000 of Justin's followers were fake and really changed things up. But what do you think about these guys comparing their number of Twitter followers?
Well, I mean, the thing is that they're both scams. So because they're both scams, the only thing that really matters is their ability to market. And so I guess if you're gonna, I mean, how do you compare two scams other than to say how effective they are at getting suckers to buy their garbage? So yeah, I think it matters. I think, I mean, the best way to hurt something like Ethereum or any other Ponzi scheme is just to fire up another Ponzi scheme and go after the same poor sheep, right? If you're slaughtering them, they're not available to be slaughtered by the next guy. So I think ultimately this is how this is all going to die out. We're going to see enough competition for the few remaining sheep that are available to be screwed over that it's not going to be cost effective anymore. That's why I like stuff like forkgen.lol, where you can just, you want an altcoin, you want a fork of Bitcoin that's better than Bitcoin Cash, just hit a button and boom, you've got it. So yeah, I think it matters. But I just want to see these guys eat each other, and as many of these wolves in the pack eating each other as possible is how we're going to, have to finally get to a point where you can stop talking about these morons.
Yeah, I can't find the tweet, but it was hilarious. He was straight up comparing Twitter followers as if that meant anything, and not that Vitalik was involved. But Tron recently soared after saying that they'd acquired the company BitTorrent. Of course, Bram Cohen, who invented BitTorrent, he's now working on what's it called? Chia, the Bitcoin that doesn't use energy, something like that, the environmental friendly Bitcoin. And he disavowed the BitTorrent company, so on and so forth. BitTorrent, the company now that they're owned by Tron, has a new plan to use tokens, probably something like Tron or built on the Tron network. I think it's BTT, BitTorrent token. JW Weatherman, was the problem with BitTorrent that it didn't use tokens, and especially considering that an early version of BitTorrent did use tokens? So what do you think about the BitTorrent token?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense. It's BitTorrent's cool, and hopefully they won't ruin it, but it'll just get forked if they try to screw with it too much. There is a cool concept wrapped up in most scams, right? Like there's always a little bit of truth as the devil's trying to get you to basically cut your own throat. And the truth is that BitTorrent is cool, and it would be even cooler if you could pay people for movies or whatever it is that you're downloading, right? Like you could reward people for hosting that content for you. That's a really cool idea, and I do think that it's on the way. But it would make more sense to use something like Bitcoin that's actually secure and has a future than whatever scam coin. So it's really the same model as a lot of these projects where it's obvious that it would be great to use electronic money in this case, and so they just create this scam coin and launch the project. If it's ever successful, it'll just be like. Well, the best example now is Brave, right? So Brave started out, it was going to be this really cool browser. The guy that created JavaScript was behind it, cool guy, we all thought, and he was going to launch something awesome where you were going to be able to pay people in Bitcoin for great content on the web. We were going to get freed from this, state-sponsored surveillance and all the marketing or the advertising sort of business model on the internet. Really, really exciting. And then they realized, well, we can make more money if we scam in the process of doing this. So they created a scam coin. And then, of course, they ended up getting it listed on Coinbase. So all the same mechanisms that we were talking about before have applied to this BAT token. But the good news is that they can't do this stuff without open sourcing it. So it looks like Gab is going to fork their project and then just enable Bitcoin. And that's the end of that. So I could see the same thing happening with Tron. It seems like the logical progression of this particular fraud.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned Brave. Like you say, Brave requires a token now. Originally, they were using Bitcoin. It seems obvious they could have pivoted to the Lightning Network, a technology that would actually work with their project. But remember, pro tip already existed before Brave. Much of the Brave interface looks exactly like the pro tip interface. Pro tip's open source. It's free. It runs as a Chrome plugin in your web browser. It times how long you spend on a website. If you put a Bitcoin address in the footer or in the header of the website, anywhere on the website, it will donate to that Bitcoin address based upon the amount of time that you spend on that website. And it's interesting because I think ProTip and Brave have part of the same problem. Now, Brave obviously has way more money than ProTip, right? Like you say, Brave started out with the developer of JavaScript. Then they raised money. Then they raised an altcoin. Then they raised even more money. Then they got on Coinbase. Then they could dump their altcoin on anybody. Then they have that whole complicated scheme where they replace the advertisement, but they pay the advertiser somehow if you apply to the program, and they pay the person whose content you're watching if they apply to the program, which is similar to what Google did when they started to scan all the world's books. And it's interesting because I agree with it with Google because the copyrights were difficult to reach and all that. I think with Brave, it was an unnecessary complication on the way to what I think was a similar goal of ProTip. I think we both wanted to reward people who make work on the internet. I make work on the internet. It's rewarding mentally. You talk to people. It's good in that way. It's not necessarily rewarding financially. This is part of the problem. A lot of people have been trained to take everything for free. This downgrades the whole economy.
Yeah, I think ProTip was a cool idea. I do think a lot of these projects, were just not viable prior to Lightning. They seemed viable because the fees were low, but the reality is that most of these projects have two big things they needed to wait for. One is just more people to own Bitcoin. We got to go through more of the collector phase for a little while. And the other is that until like this year, Lightning just didn't exist in a way that made it really viable to use it. It was an idea, the payment channels idea goes a ways back, but as far as actually being able to use any cryptocurrency at scale, the technology just didn't exist. Now it does with Lightning. The other things that can scale are just not cryptocurrencies, because a cryptocurrency means that you don't have any trusted third parties and that it's reasonably secure, right? It's like legitimately secure. All these other things are just, jokes. Like Monero is a total joke. All they have to do is wait for Fluffy Pony to tell them, what fork to run, what hard fork to run on a regular basis. Like if you're going to ask somebody what code to run every 6 months, why don't you just ask somebody what transactions are valid every few days or every few minutes? Because you have the same security issues. You've just created a bunch of security theater that makes it inefficient. So yeah, I mean, I think Pro Tip was a cool idea, just ahead of its time. And I think a lot of the stuff is still kind of ahead of its time, although with stuff like Gab and Twitter possibly integrating a Bitcoin wallet and Lightning and micropayments to solve the spam problem, we could be getting closer and closer to that tipping point where these other projects will be viable because people will own Bitcoin, but it's not there as of this moment.
The other thing we're seeing a return of is these centralized tipping bots. We had this initial problem with ChangeTip where Bitcoin is a ledger of payments and it's a way of keeping track of the payments, and there's no double spending, and a lot of the complexities of payments are solved when you use Bitcoin. And when they had ChangeTip, they would say things like, someone has sent you Bitcoin, but they didn't mean that someone sent you Bitcoin. They meant that they had changed a database entry in their database that entitled you to some Bitcoin when you withdrew it. And that's when Bitcoin will actually be sent to you. Now we're seeing the same thing with, I don't even remember. Obviously, I think there's a Bcash tip bot. There's a Bitcoin SV tip bot. I think there's a tip bot that pretends to tip with Lightning. I'm not sure that it actually does. JW, what do you think about these? And what about this constant attachment of centralized databases to Bitcoin that then end up replicating the features of Bitcoin? And we're supposed to be really excited that they've given us another tip bot.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, in a way, it goes along with the scam stuff, right? So if you have a captive group of people that you're fleecing that don't really understand the only purpose of Bitcoin or the blockchain is to be government resistant, then you can get away with all kinds of stuff, especially if they're not technically competent to know when or when it's not government resistant. So yeah, it makes sense that this stuff would go along with that. As far as centralized services go, I am a little bit more flexible on that than I was maybe a year ago coming into the space, because I think that it makes sense. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do with MathBot. Like, I've given this a lot of thought, and what we're going to do with MathBot is we're going to use OpenNode in the background. If you sign up right now, you can kind of see where the rewards are going to accrue to kids that are passing levels. So yeah, just click play now and sign in with your Google account. So the way that it will work is up to about $50, the kids will just accrue and hold Bitcoin in a custodial way with OpenNode. So close that. That's just a hint because you're on the first level. So you see where it says $2.03. So as a kid passes levels, he's going to get like a quarter per level. He's going to earn a quarter per level. And if parents want to sponsor him to learn math and programming, they can fund that, right? They can reward him automatically through that. And the onboarding process is really tough as it is, because we have to have parents. We're basically going to have to walk parents through downloading and installing the Cash app, buying Bitcoin for the first time, and then taking that Bitcoin and sending it to us so that we can parse it out to the kid as he passes levels. That's already really, really cumbersome. And the only way that we could make it really secure is if there was like a 2 of 3 multi-sig setup where the parents send the money to the kid, but we need to sign off on it, in chunks maybe, or in one big chunk at the end. But setting up that's not really realistic to ask a parent or to try to ask a software company to walk a new user in the onboarding process through setting up a 2 of 3 multi-sig. So we'll do the centralized solution where we'll just hold the funds up to about $50, and then after that, then where it's not part of the onboarding flow, we will encourage the kid to withdraw money to a wallet like Green Address, or samurai as they've earned it. And so it's sort of saying, look, we're going to do the easy thing when it's a small amount of money, but we won't let you store in a significant amount of money in this centralized service. At that point, we're going to make you onboard to something else. So it's similar to like services that will let you sign up and start using it in a streamlined way that's not very secure, but at a certain point, they'll require that you enable two-factor authentication, right? If your
Well,
balance.
and that's what I'd like to see from Bitcoin wallets. So many wallets make you write down your words or have a very difficult password, and you're just trying to try it out. No one is working on the user experience of how difficult it is just to use Bitcoin for the first time, even if you only have 10 bucks worth.
Right.
And also, I think the other thing you're showing there is how difficult it is for a small company like MathBot to use Bitcoin because you have to acknowledge how much education you have to do. It's not just you have to write a tutorial about how to use MathBot. You have to write a tutorial about how to get Bitcoin, how to send the Bitcoin, how not to send too much Bitcoin, what could happen if you did, all these other things. People just aren't familiar with Bitcoin yet. When they are, it'll be a much easier process for you or someone like MathBot to do it. The other thing I want to mention, we were talking about fundraising, is Tallycoin, tallyco.in. Yes, it is centralized. There is a potential man in the middle attack, but this is a great little project that DJ Booth has put together. I kind of gave him the idea. We've been working together on it. It's really simple. You bring in a Bitcoin address, you bring in a goal, like I want to raise $100, and you create a tally coin that will help you keep track of how much Bitcoin you've earned. And I think a lot of fundraising is about trying to do this and trying to raise raise funds and having a countdown, having this, we're 80% towards our goal, we're 90% towards our goal. If you can just keep telling people that, that's a lot of fundraising. So I really like Tallycoin. There's also one, Bit Patreon, things like that. A lot of Patreon things are trying to expand as there's been the whole banning of Patreon of some I'll call them, for lack of a better word, right-wing or conservative accounts. I think his name is Sargon of Akkad, a friend of Jordan Peterson, was banned from Patreon. After that, Jordan Peterson quit Patreon, despite later revealing that he was making a pretty unbelievable $30,000 a month on Patreon. That's $500,000 a year that he gave up to pretty much try to start what is probably going to be a right-wing Patreon, which will probably get upset when they ban left-wing people, and will go through the same thing over and over again. Of course, there's a belief that all the Silicon Valley companies are all left-wing, not right-wing, so on and so forth. JW and I were talking about this a little bit with Twitter at the beginning. I want to go back to this. People have this mistaken belief that Twitter and Facebook are common carriers or open platforms. Just because all of your friends are on Facebook and just because all of the popular and interesting people in the world are on Twitter doesn't mean that they're open. It's not. It's not like two independent Unix servers. One of them's running Linux and running Slackware, and one's running HPUX, and they're all communicating on this open protocol, sharing messages. It very well could have been, right, JW? We had things like touch and finger and talk. You could talk to people on a Unix server. You could talk across multiple servers. You could finger. You used to be able to type in this command and you'd go look up like the developer of Doom, John Carmack, and he'd have this little short message. What am I working on right now, John Carmack? And you could finger John Carmack and you would get his little message. And in a lot of ways, this is where Twitter started. This is where this short message thing started. The same Facebook, you could share your photos. You could put your photos up on a website. You could email them directly to a group of friends, things like this. Then they became servers. Then they became falsely labeled, just like the malls of the 70s and 80s. People said, oh, a mall is a public place, and you can go down to the mall and you can protest. Well, give it a try. A mall is a public place for commerce. In a lot of ways, people see the internet in the same way. It started out as an open space. Now it's become a public controlled space for commerce. So what do you think, JW? Do people have, is it this false expectation of free speech on Twitter and free speech without consequences and controlling things when really Facebook, Twitter, these are companies. We are performing in Google Square. If Google doesn't like it, also you said earlier Google might be responsible for it, which is a whole nother issue.
Yeah, so part of it is the law that they are actually responsible for everything on their platform, which really puts them in a position where they do have to make decisions about censorship, right? They have to decide when is something mean and hateful, or when is it just kind of harsh and clear. And if you put somebody in that position, which the law does, right? They can't legitimately say, "Hey, we don't worry," like Craigslist, right? Like you can buy and sell whatever you want on Craigslist. They'll end up in jail like Silk Road, in theory, because they're just as responsible for everything that everybody says on their platform, according to U.S. law, which is a terrible U.S. law. Like we definitely should not have that. And once they're in that position, like it is not questionable whether people in Silicon Valley lean to the left or not. They're going to look at something that a conservative is going to say is totally acceptable, and they're going to be really upset by it, because they do believe in, they are statists. They believe in government control. They believe that, that there is this concept of the commons and we need to tax people really highly or everybody's going to get screwed over, right? They have these beliefs that are very, very ingrained, and they're in the position of deciding what is and isn't appropriate ideas. You're not going to get like some sort of, mechanical, unbiased execution of that. And so I think the law is part of the problem. I think that's a big part of the problem. And I think that people should get pissed off and they should look for alternatives. And when I watched the interview with Jack, the Twitter CEO, on Joe Rogan, he was using the term blockchain, but I think really what he was saying was pretty intelligent. And that was that eventually there won't be a gatekeeper, right? Eventually these systems will be decentralized and they'll be government hard. But Twitter is not government hard right now. And that means that whoever is in power in a government in a country is going to put a lot of pressure on Twitter, right? They're like, let's take the US out of it. Let's look at France, right? You think that France doesn't put pressure on Twitter to silence certain voices and promote other voices that they think are in their own best interest? Of course they do. Like this is basic sort of intelligence agency activity, right? It's basic function of the government is to try to shape and control the narrative. And if there's a company that they can put pressure on to do that, they're going to do that. So in a lot of ways, Twitter is going to be pushed around because they don't have a military, right? And they're subject to all these different countries that they operate in that do have a military that will cut them off or will fine them crazy amounts for hate speech or whatever. So in a lot of ways, the US isn't even the biggest problem. It's other countries that are even more draconian about what they determine is acceptable ideas and what aren't. It's a big problem, though.
Well, and I think we're going to see it even more with the EU banning of memes. They have the copyright issue. If I take a picture of you in front of a building and that building is copyright, even if I put words on the screen making it a political message or some other kind of speech, if I use that copyrighted building, you could take down my meme. Now I think it's going to be on Twitter and some of the other providers to take down these memes preemptively and to have software to block copyrighted images, and that it's this responsibility. I think, again, from a cyberpunk perspective, it's easy to say this and to say, I told you so, and that I've been telling you this all along. But from the very beginning, platforms like Twitter and Facebook were built improperly. This centralized server, this control issue, like you're saying, has always been a problem. First, because it is controllable, and second, because of the goals of the platform. The goals of the Twitter or the Facebook platform were not the same as the goals of, say, the internet or Richard Stallman or someone that's just trying to share data and information. Their goals, I would push back on JJ, but I don't think they're exactly statist. I think they're more capitalist. I think they want to use the existing rules of the system to make themselves rich by making software, etc. I don't think they care what the software actually does, if it encourages community or enhances friendship or whatever the latest Twitter and Facebook slogan. They're using your data, they're using centralized control, and they're making systems that can move faster than Linux, things that can be funded and marketed faster. It's like the dark side, right? They go the quick and easy path.
No, I
whereas,
mean,
you know,
look, man,
like,
I live
yeah.
with these people, and they are very, very ideologically motivated. Like probably the biggest generation of ideologically motivated people in maybe ever.
Well,
Because
they must be heartbroken, right? Because they failed, right? They delivered a system that in many ways, and we can go back and forth on the severity, but allowed the election, one of the most important things, to be twisted to this Trump and, you know, whatever else, all these other
well,
things.
yeah, I mean they are deeply affected by that sort of stuff. But when they created Twitter, they wanted it to be a free speech platform. They knew they had aspirations that it would become the public square, and it would be in many ways censorship resistant. Political activists in countries where they're being oppressed would be able to share information about what's actually happening, right? And that it deeply motivated them. It wasn't just the cash, because a lot of these guys hit really early on. They hit more than enough cash than they're going to be able to spend in a lifetime, and so they either end up doing nonprofits, or now for the last, I don't know, 20 years, it's been create a business that actually makes the world better. Don't try to do a nonprofit, because that's, that's they're slowly realizing that the incentives there don't really make sense, or many of them have. So I think that in a lot of ways, Twitter was very much as motivated for the public good as a nonprofit. But the reality is, and I think that if you watch that interview with Joe Rogan, and you think about every time he says blockchain, think about him saying something that is censorship resistant and government hard, you'll see that he's still motivated to do that, right? That doesn't mean that he's not very conflicted, and he's not ultimately a statist, and that he doesn't think that government should be involved with regulating what people can and can't say beyond, actual
Well,
violence.
I mean, I would agree with that, and I'd also say I'm sure the Facebook people had the same idea. They had good ideas, good thoughts, and to go back to PayPal as well. PayPal wanted to create a currency for the internet, although they instantly understood if you could use the PayPal currency not on their website, not through their control, if they allowed it for any kind of outside transaction, the outside transaction could be drugs or worse or
No, but
worse.
they didn't realize that. It's not like they were like, "Oh yeah, if you have money, you can buy bad things with it." Those guys aren't that stupid. They knew before they wanted to create it that technology can be used for good and evil. But in general, since more people are not wanting to kill their neighbors, a technology actually makes the world a better place. They know that's how it works on average. So they were more than happy to have that stuff happen with PayPal. The problem with PayPal is it wasn't government hard, and that's the same problem with Twitter. It's going to be the same problem with Gab at some point, possibly very soon. But there is also the possibility that it doesn't have to be fully government hard. It just has to be hard enough to where it's not worth messing with. And so I have some hope that something like Lightning on Twitter or Lightning on Gab, where it's not advertiser based and it actually financially hurts when you exercise censorship, that could be enough to where the benefit that these corrupt governments get out of pushing things around on Twitter and pushing, or even people internal to Twitter that have just been poured over with government propaganda that actually are willingly agents of censorship and corruption. It's very possible that if the business model shifts, they won't do that because it won't be enough benefit for the cost. So not everything has to be as hard as Bitcoin. If Bitcoin actually exists and is hard, just being able to pay people with Bitcoin may create systems that are hard enough. And so I'm kind of still hopeful that Twitter and Gap can be saved.
It's for me, it's all about the structure. If you start out with a structure like Facebook or Twitter, especially Facebook, it was structured to feed the data to advertisers. So that was a big conflict with better, more moral interests. Twitter, it could survive, say, the censorship of maybe the Iranian government because its servers are here in the U.S. But now we have governments like the Russian government saying that if you want to store Russians' data, you have to store the data in the country. Things like this, that's where Twitter or Facebook's going to lose. I think
Wait a
Gap
minute,
has
this
a
stuff is
chance. They have
already
a
happening. That's not new. Like Russia might say you have to store the data here because they'll get better access to it. But they have already been saying, if you don't delete this, we're going to cut off your service to Russia. And it's a big market, right? So they're already, all of the countries are still pushing Twitter around. There's constant negotiations with all these different governments on what is and isn't going to be appropriate in in their country or on Twitter's website. And Twitter has to try to navigate all of that stuff. But what I'm saying is, if we can get to the point where Twitter is going to lose more money if they actually knuckle under than if they stand firm, which could happen if they are funded not through advertising, but through micropayments, for example. If that transition happened, then Twitter would take some hits, right? If Russia said, "Hey, you have to censor these particular memes," if it was going to hurt them financially to do so, they just wouldn't do it, and then Russia would stop asking. And to the degree that Twitter gets kicked around, other competitors pop up. But it doesn't necessarily have to be completely government hard. It just has to be to the point where it's not profitable to attack it. And it's always hard to know where that line is. I don't know how far we have to push it. But as it is right now, they're very weak and they're very much kicked around. And something like micropayments could make them a lot stronger, and it might be strong enough.
I think it's really interesting. It's as if there's a battlefield out there, and the startups were all wandering around with shields but no swords. And now they have Bitcoin. Now they have maybe even Lightning Network payments, which, like you're saying, micropayments. They could actually monetize their company this way. While in the past, if you were going to start a Facebook or a Twitter, obviously you'd say advertising. That's how we're going to do it, or selling the user's data. That's how we're going to do it, because you couldn't rely on micropayments, or you couldn't rely on a subscription service where the users could put their money in an account that could be, cryptographically locked up. You're going to get a guaranteed amount of subscription payments, even if the value of the Bitcoin goes up or down.
Yep.
All those kind of things. It expands the startups, and that's why Bitcoin's so much more important than everyone's always like, why aren't you into altcoins, or why aren't you into tokens? And no, it's all the power into one token, which enhances all of the companies. This Twitter doesn't have to make Twitter coin. Facebook doesn't have to make Facebook coin. They're much more powerful if they use the same coin. And it's going to take everyone a long time to get to that. They're going to probably have to create their own coin and fail first, maybe succeed first, then fail some more. Whatever it is, I think we're going to come down to that all-in-one value thing. But I want to also invite you in the audience in. If you're in the audience right now, we've got the phone calls open. You can Skype us now on Skype at World Crypto Network, all one word, or at 518-600-1949. We're glad to talk about any of the issues we've been talking about this morning. I want to go ahead and change the topic, give JW something new to chew on here.
Let me say one more thing about that.
All right, go ahead.
Because I haven't really heard many people talk about this. One of the problems with the advertising model is that the government doesn't actually have to put direct pressure on Twitter, because the way that crony capitalism works is, let's say that you're Microsoft and you're advertising on Twitter. And Microsoft is constantly doing deals with politicians, right? They're constantly trying to get better tax breaks, better circumstances, better laws for them, right? They have a big lobbying arm, and the lobbying arm is just to interface with politicians and get favors and give favors, right? And so it doesn't really require a whole lot of conspiracy to understand that if something is happening on Twitter that these politicians don't like, let's not say it's hate speech or whatever. Let's just say that, let's say there's a senator from North Carolina and there's a sex scandal, and Twitter is a major part of that, right? They're pushing it really hard. And Microsoft is working with that senator right now to do some kind of a deal, maybe set up a new headquarters in his state, whatever. It makes a lot of sense that Microsoft would tell Twitter, hey, you got to chill out on this stuff, or we got to pull some ad spend or ad spending out for a little while, because you're really pissing off this guy, and we need him. We're right in the middle of a deal, right? We need him to do us a favor here. So that is the nature of all of these corporations and government working together. I mean, the State Department isn't Bourne Identity. It's people, trying to make deals and negotiate on behalf of Boeing. So when that's the environment and the business model is totally tied up in advertising, it flows very naturally that we would end up in a very censorship heavy environment. But if the business model flips to where it's not Microsoft doing deals with the senator that's the customer of Twitter, it's you and me, and we're just throwing a few Satoshis here and there that end up in the hands of Twitter, they're much more likely to be able to serve our needs.
I agree. We're much more the product and of Facebook and Twitter rather than the people that work with them. We never have any meetings with Zuckerberg or with Twitter. They're always having meetings with other people. Those people are the ones who use Twitter, the advertisers.
Yep.
But we had some interesting tweets lately. Whale Panda was calling out blockchain. He said blockchain's block explorer lists BCH first before BTC, even though it's 3.4% of Bitcoin's price, while still not having implemented SegWit. There are plenty of better block explorers around, so stop using them and let them fade further into irrelevance and shitcoinery. And I'm not sure why blockchain.info has not adopted SegWit. That doesn't make any sense. But I did ask Nick Carey if this kind of stuff went down without his knowledge, or is blockchain really choosing Bcash over Bitcoin? Nick responded. He said, "Hi, Bitcoin is still our most prominently featured explorer. We recently launched the BCH transactional search capabilities. I appreciate the feedback, and there's already a ticket to set the rank order based on traffic." So it does look like this is being fixed. Sure, you could say from a programming perspective, BCH does come before BTC alphabetically. JW, do you think they made a little whoopsie? Do you add this together with the no SegWit support as well as Coinbase? I'm not sure they've upgraded yet. All these kind of people dragging their feet. Is it just really easy to step on a political landmine out here? Or are these companies still not interested in Bitcoin and Lightning Network?
So one of the things that I'm more and more convinced of after a year and a few months in this space is that there's really not very many business models available. There's a couple legitimate companies, Lightning Labs, Blockstream. There's probably 2 or 3 other ones that I'm not thinking of right now. But for every one of those legitimate companies, there's at least 100, and I don't think that I'm exaggerating my order of magnitude there, that are really just feeding off of the scam coins. They're either feeding directly or they're getting paid. You talked about Paul Hui a little while ago, who is openly shilling BSV now. I didn't know that guy was a scammer a year ago. It wasn't until I was on, I think I was on WCN actually. I think Vortex had a show, and Paul, working alongside Jameson Lopp with his support in the conversation in a really weird way, was trying to talk about all the ways that Lightning is an altcoin. And that's when I knew, all right, this guy's on the take, right? He's a scammer. But it still took months before that came out. You're showing Daniel Krawitz. He's another one of those guys, right? Like he was very, very subtly shilling Bitcoin Cash just by creating a false narrative, right? He was saying that that you needed to be diversified, that was the safe bet, right? And, you don't diversify into scams. We all knew that. But now he's openly shilling for this thing. So if you see a company or a product that's doing something slightly shady, they're using whatever brand they have to pump a scam. And as time goes on and that brand gets a little bit more and more obliterated, they'll become more and more blatant about it. So I have no doubt that the guys behind blockchain.info are bad guys. Because if you just were to guess, 98% of everybody in this space is either selling a scam, quietly providing intellectual cover for a scam. I think Andreas Antonopoulos is in this category, right? I think he provides the false narrative. He's very subtle about it. You'll notice he was not very hard on Bitcoin Cash at all through the whole process. He still has never been very hard on it. And what was he saying when that was going on? He was saying, look, there's going to be a lot of different monies. Even the Girl Scouts are going to have their own money for cookies. That is very stupid. And it just so happens to be exactly what you need somebody prominent to say to provide a lot more sheep to the slaughter for whatever your scam coin is. So I get it. He's still by far, I mean, he's probably 90% of the space, right? His community is huge.
Well, okay, so hold on just a second.
I've been hit pretty hard on Twitter, actually, was because I think I'm the only person that has ever said, hey, I think this guy's a bad guy. But I was also the first guy to say that about Daniel Krawitz. I was the first guy to say that about who's the Truth Coin guy. So, give it a year, and, depending on his popularity, he'll eventually just come flat out and start supporting a scam coin too.
Okay, well, I'll put the Andreas thing to the side, but I want to agree with you. There is no reason for there to be multiple monies. That's not just a simple logic thing where you're like, oh, there's multiple countries, so there's multiple monies. That's the most efficient system. It seems if you look at oil, oil is only traded in USD. Maybe that's a monopoly. Maybe it's government controlled. Maybe it's military controlled, whatever. Maybe it's more efficient to have a market where we say, oh, well, what's the price of oil? Well, what's the price of oil in the Netherlands? Oh, you have to convert it. You have to use a different system. That doesn't make any sense. In a certain utilitarian, a true value sense, having one currency is more efficient.
This does confuse a lot of people,
Not
though.
see that. Like, how can Andreas not see that from just a logical perspective? Like, yes, there will be other currencies; they'll go up and down. From a utilitarian standpoint, isn't that the logical place to stand? Like,
So, I mean, there's two possibilities, right? One is that he's genuinely confused and that people have confronted him on this, including me. Like, I confronted him on this for probably 8 months before I finally interacted with him enough to where I was willing to call him a scammer, right? So, one possibility is that he's genuinely confused and that people like me just don't have the capacity to explain his error in a clear way. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think if that's not the case, what's the other most likely possibility? Well, where is all the money in this space? We just said that 98% of it is shilling scams, and he just happens to be making an error and persisting in it that makes a lot of people wealthy, but he's not getting paid. That seems not very likely in my view, especially given the fact that every time I've said this about everybody else up until this point, he's the only one I think that I've said this that hasn't shown his true colors. And I only said it recently, right? It took about a year from the time that I said Krawitz was a scammer because of the lies that he was spewing before he just came full out for BSV. So I'm not too early, or I'm not, Andreas is not behind schedule on the JW calling somebody a scammer and then it being obvious to everybody else.
well, I was very. I mean, I still like Andreas, and if I see him personally, it'd be nice to see him again. It's been a long time and all that. But yeah, I was a little surprised to see him write the Mastering Ethereum book. I agree that yes, in a certain way, he's the man. He wrote the Mastering Bitcoin book, so of course he would be in line to write the next book as part of a series, as part of a historian, part of a knowledgeable person. It's not unreasonable that you know a lot about Bitcoin. Perhaps you would know a lot about Ethereum as well. That worked for me. But I wasn't sure about it. It provided intellectual cover for them and still does all kinds of other things.
Let me tell you why I didn't buy that. Because you
Go ahead.
can't master Ethereum. Because Ethereum is not a government hard blockchain. If Ethereum actually wanted to do all the things that it was saying it's doing, it could just take a hash of the transactions and throw them in the Bitcoin blockchain every 10 minutes. They would get everything that they claim they want to be able to do, and it would actually have irreversible transactions.
And originally, Vitalik tried to build it on Bitcoin. There was some kind of disagreement over adding some new thing in, and
No,
they
you don't
didn't want to add to Bitcoin. But
you
I
can
do. I think it could be done that way, and I think it would be more intellectually honest for Andreas to admit that rather than to write a whole book about it. If it's an experiment, if it's a scientific, all this stuff, if it's an experiment, we've put $1 billion into experiment. We are being very risky with that $1 billion. I don't know whose $1 billion it is, but it's somebody's, right?
Yeah, there's no need to put anything new into Bitcoin. You can just take the Merkle root of all the Ethereum transactions and stuff them into Bitcoin every 10 minutes. That's it. It's I mean, we could do that right now, right? Like you can put metadata in Bitcoin transactions, like, the Times article with the bank bailout, right? Like people stuff into Bitcoin all the time. It's not hard. Colored coins, similar concept, right? People do it all the time. Counterparty tokens, you could do that. The only reason that you don't do that is that you don't want to admit that you actually need to be dependent on Bitcoin's proof of work for security. It ruins your scam coin narrative of we're better for the environment or whatever other nonsense that you're trying to push at any point in time. So that's the only reason they don't do it. He knows that, right? He's known that for a really long time. So to write a book called Mastering Ethereum as if it's a legitimate project that's actually trying to create smart contracts in a government hard way is completely dishonest. And that's why if he did not get paid from Ethereum supporters, he's an idiot. Now, I don't have proof that he got paid from them, but if I was going to write a book called Mastering Ethereum, I would expect to get some serious donations from the Ethereum community. If he didn't, I can't imagine why not, right? If he believed it, you would still expect him to get some money, even if he actually believes that Ethereum is legitimate. Why not? Like, if you were to write a bunch of articles about how awesome Ethereum is, you wouldn't expect to get a few donations from the Ethereum community?
Well, and I have the same situation here where, like you're saying, you can never tell if someone's a scammer, and some people start off being nice and then become scammers, or, maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They needed money, they didn't want to become a scammer, or maybe they actually fell romantically in love with an altcoin. Maybe there was an altcoin out there that had just the right features for them, and they just couldn't see through that it was a scam, or maybe a combination of the both. It had the right features and they were paid. I don't know what happened, but obviously, some of our contributors here started out, they fell in love with Bitcoin Rhodium, some kind of a fork of Bitcoin that I'm not sure it ever came out. So that's an interesting one where you can't take donations in the coin yet, at least actually having them sent to you until the thing's actually released. Whereas, like you're saying, Ethereum was released, he could take donations. The other one recently turned over and became a Bitcoin SV supporter. And I'm not sure why. He seemed to believe that Craig Wright was a fake Satoshi right up until the point where
Who
he
is
didn't.
this? I didn't hear about this one.
Oh, well, first, of course, Andy Hoffman is a big Bitcoin Rhodium supporter. You can ask him on his Twitter, and you can get mad at me for not controlling his Twitter or whatever you want to do. But Shembu Spain recently, he just kind of went full Bitcoin SV. He started his own channel called the Bitcoin SV channel. And for a while, that was fine because he kind of talked about that over there and he talked about Bitcoin over here. But then, of course, he wasn't getting enough attention on that channel. So he took an episode on there and re-uploaded it over here. And I, of course, noticed that, wasn't very interested in that. So now he just does content on his own channel. And of course, he has the right to talk about anything he wants on his own Twitter or his own YouTube and all that. But no, he's all into Bitcoin SV, and it's superior. It's
Yeah.
it's that same, yeah.
It's one of the things that's hard for people that are honest, people that are just like, well, wait a minute, I can just go get a job and I can do meaningful work. I can drive a forklift and I can move stuff around a warehouse that makes people's lives better, and I can make enough money to take care of my family. It's hard for them to get in the mindset of these intellectuals that will just sell out for for just cash. But
Or
that's the
also,
way that
I
it
want to
is.
say it's hard for real intellectuals who actually believe in the things that you're saying. Like, I actually believe in the principles that I'm espousing and try to live by them, etc. To see people just interchange them so quickly is a surprise, even if it is money or whatever.
Yeah, it is really hard for. I agree, and I think, I mean, the rule of thumb that I've had for a couple decades now, having worked on things that are related to fraud, software security, you end up dealing with a lot of those sort of things. The rule of thumb that I landed on pretty early on, and I apply it to, other people that I'm invested in startups with, I apply it to other executives that I know, is that they don't believe anything they're saying. They're only saying what they're saying because they think that that's going to benefit them. And there are exceptions, but the exceptions are so rare, and I consider myself one of the exceptions, right? I wouldn't, but what I'm telling you is don't believe me when I say that, right? It's a better heuristic for you to use to get through life to assume that absolutely everybody is a scammer all the time, especially if they're an intellectual, right? If they're getting paid to do a radio show, write books, anything in that intellectual realm, you are going to be so much better off if you just assume they're court historians. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not going to say true things on occasion and that they can't do some research and bring some enlightenment. But you should always be really, really skeptical that they're not just doing it for the cash, because so many of them are that it's probably like 99% or 99.9%. So it's not even worth it to find the person that's not, right?
Well,
Like,
and I'm surprised and shocked that people still don't know this, especially conspiracy type people. I mean, obviously, I go back to the X Files, and he was like, "Trust no one," and he really meant it. And if you watched any of that show, he learned about this and he learned about that, and there was a higher level and a higher level, and that guy didn't understand what he was doing, what they were doing. It was so strange to see everyone flock to say an Alex Jones and just to trust whatever Alex Jones is saying, which is a ridiculous idea in itself. The same way in Bitcoin, just to flock to one person, they know the price or they know the tech or whatever it's going to be, and then to see all these other people, burn off and go to these other Bitcoin and other things. It's very strange.
Well, it's tough because like if you're watching MSNBC and then you go to Alex Jones's channel, you're like, whoa, this guy is, he's talking about stuff that these guys won't talk about, right? And you know that a lot of the stuff that he's saying is like you instinctively know, because of just being a human, that a lot of the stuff he's saying in a significant way, he's more trustworthy than CNN. But at the same time, you got to remember that he's also in this intellectual class, right? He's also somebody that he is going to get more or less money depending on what he says. And unless that you think he's actually loves you, even though he doesn't know you, you got to assume that he's going to say whatever's going to put the most money in his pocket. And that's tough. It's really tough for people that are the either like normal people that just actually solve real problems for their neighbors and make a living, or for people like you and me, maybe. But I'm still gonna say, like, I'm assuming that you'll say anything for a buck. That's my operating procedure. It is, I think, if you are intellectual and honest, it's even tougher because it's stupid, right? It's stupid for I'm an ANCAP, and I think that it's really stupid that we have people that are politicians that support things like the Federal Reserve, because it slows down economic progress. And once you have enough money, for example, to live comfortably for the rest of your life, what you really should be worried about is dying of cancer. And how do you deal with dying of cancer? Well, you let technology progress. So you don't want to screw with the economy. You don't want to create these boom and bust cycles that slow things down. It's in your own best interest to do so, right? To not support these frauds that slow things down. I would apply the same logic to most of these people involved in Bitcoin, right? Like Andreas, by pushing this scam coin narrative, that we're going to have multiple monies, he's slowing down the adoption of secure money. He's a relatively young guy. He's probably got at least another 40 years on this earth. He's probably got enough money at this point to live comfortably. But if we could adopt a sound money faster, there's a very good chance that he wouldn't die of something that he will die of. So it's just stupid to be a scammer at a certain point. But it doesn't matter, because there's something that's misfiring in these people's minds. They can't see far enough out into the future. And so they're just ultimately very short-term and foolish.
It's the same people that cut me off on the freeway, so they can get there 5 minutes faster, and they don't drive in little spaced out patterns, and they don't drive slower when we all need to drive slower. It's that guy who's zigging around through the lanes. And yes, it looks very flashy what they're doing with Ethereum or what they're doing with Tron or whatever BitTorrent coin, whatever today's coin of the day is. But I agree with you, JW. Bitcoin adopting sound money, this is a larger project. This is a human-wide project. This is a space program. Yes, that's why it's so confusing. That's why we have all this. It's a store of value, but it's a currency, but it's a fluid, but it's not fluid. All these kind of things. We have all of these ideas at the same time because they're all true. Because Bitcoin really is that important, and because it really does solve things like the Byzantium generals problem. When we look at these blockchains that aren't mined by anyone, that aren't secured by anyone, it excites everyone, and all these governments are really excited and all those kind of things. But it's not actually going to change anything. If Bitcoin is actually mass adopted, if everyone gets into it, and it kind of seems like a fait accompli sometimes, it doesn't at other times. And I think that we can help it along. There's another group of people that are like, Bitcoin's invincible. Bitcoin must be adopted. Therefore, we don't have to do anything. And if you're even doing anything, you're wasting your time. What do you think about that, JW? Should we just do nothing?
No, I mean, I think I mean, as a Calvinist, right? Like that's an argument that's near and dear to my heart, in the sense that, yeah, God's in control of all things, and it's going to work out according to plan. But I'm part of that plan, right? Like if there's an opportunity to do good, that's because that opportunity has been presented to me, and I'm going to take advantage of it. So I do think Bitcoin is going to be adopted, right? I do think that it's inevitable in a sense. But if I can increase the customers or the sucker acquisition cost for these attacks against Bitcoin by 0.5%, that's, that may be a lifetime's worth of work, right? Like that might be the most important thing that I do, professionally. Like I think the stuff that I do in my personal life is probably more important and will have a longer impact. But yeah, it's worthwhile work. So why wouldn't you do it? And you can, we're not going to I'm not going to increase the rate of adoption by several years, but I might be able to do it by several days. And that could mean that a war, literally, it could mean that a war ends a few days earlier, or an embargo that's starving children right now in Yemen ends a few days earlier. That's huge. Like a few hours is huge. 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes, we end an embargo on Yemen. That's a number of people that don't die. So it's worthwhile, even though, it's around the edges, right? We can only all do just a little bit here and there. But let me plug that 10 hours of Bitcoin site, because the whole idea of it is that if you go out here and you invest 10 hours, some of it you can read, but a lot of it you can just listen to in a podcast format, or listen to it or watch it on YouTube. If you invest 10 hours, you'll be inoculated to these scam coins, and you'll understand if Bitcoin matters, why it matters. And 10 hours is not a lot of time to put into something that's as important as the internet was in the 80s, right? Like you can still get in really early on understanding how the world is going to be affected by this thing, just by investing 10 hours of podcast time.
Definitely check out 10 Hours of Bitcoin at 10hoursofbitcoin.com. Good stuff, JW. Totally agreeing with you. Forgot what I was going to say, but something about Bitcoin and how it's going to change things. Oh, yeah, we were talking about how, yeah, you're not going to win the entire game. Me talking about Bitcoin today will not get us the entire way to adoption. But I think you have to think about it like baseball statistics. They have this stat called WAR. Wins above replacement player. So if you took a completely average player and you replaced him with like Hank Aaron, Hank Aaron's going to hit 5 more home runs than that replacement player. Therefore, you're going to win more games, maybe like 0.1 or 0.2 more games if you have Hank Aaron than if you have a random baseball player. In that same way, we have you and we have me and JW and these other people. And we're going to get a 0.1 more, and we're going to get a 0.2 more, and we're going to carve our way to this Bitcoin future. And I think everyone should get on board with that, and they should help out. And certainly I could have done nothing. If I had Bitcoin from the beginning, like, say, Roger Ver, I don't know that I would have ever talked about it. I would go away to a beach somewhere and not bother anybody. And like JW saying, invest in those cancer cures or whatever it is. So I think it's better to talk about it. It's better to do things. And since I have done things, all kinds of other people are talking about Bitcoin now. Programs have been started. The world has been changed. Ripples have been made. Certainly, I didn't do it all myself. All kinds of other people did work. But you can create those ripples. You can create those positive ripples. I think it's good to have that idea and have that positive idea out there. I think we're going to head towards the end of the show. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for the chat, for hanging out. We've titled this episode In the Past. I'm sure that's why no one's watching. Everyone was like, oh, that's from 2018. It can't be live. But that's probably it. So check out JW Weatherman on Twitter. I'm sure he'll be back soon at JW Weatherman _ and at 10hoursofbitcoin.com. We've got lots of donation addresses in the description below. You can donate and join our Patreon. You could give us a thumbs up and a share. That's easy. You could also subscribe and turn the notifications on. We'll be back. We've got another great proof of work interview coming up on Wednesday. We'll try to be back again for Friday, the Bitcoin group. And we'll be back again next Monday for Monday Morning Bitcoin Talk Show Live. Until next time, bye-bye.